You've heard stories about haunted houses, about strangers who appear at the wrong time, about the shadows that seem to watch from the corner of your eye. But what if these stories were not just tales told to frighten you? What if they were pieces of someone's reality, moments that are entirely true, moments that started quietly, in the day-to-day, and ended with a fear that clung to every corner of their life? In the quiet of a new home, in the emptiness of a street late at night, in a place where family and friends should feel safe, ordinary life can fracture. Doors can close behind you, but outside, eyes may linger. Sounds can echo, footsteps can appear where none should exist. And it doesn't announce itself with a scream or a shadow in your doorway. Sometimes, it begins with a gaze, a presence, or a knock that should never come. Tonight, you will hear 3 accounts of experiences that are startling in their clarity. Each story begins in what seemed like safety, in familiar places, among people who should have been friends, neighbors, or strangers passing by. Each story escalates quietly, steadily, until the world that felt normal becomes uncertain, until a simple glance out the window or a soft tap on the door is enough to make someone question their surroundings. These are not stories of fiction. They are not dramatizations or tales crafted for entertainment. They are true recollections, moments in which ordinary people encountered situations that challenged their sense of security, their sense of control, and sometimes their very understanding of reality. Some events are easy to dismiss at first. A noise in the night. A stranger standing still in the yard. A repeated phrase that makes you pause. But when these moments repeat, when patterns emerge, when the impossible begins to feel possible, that is when fear no longer rests only in imagination. That is when the ordinary becomes tense, when instinct turns into vigilance, and when survival becomes more than a thought, it becomes necessity. Tonight, you will meet people who felt watched in their own homes. People who were followed by voices and faces that should not have known them. People who encountered forces that did not fit into any explanation they could trust. You will hear what happened to them, how they responded, and how these events changed the way they see the world. Every sound you hear, every shadow you notice tonight, every story that unfolds, is a reminder that even in the spaces we consider safe, the unexpected can arrive. And when it does, there may be no warning. There may be no one to turn to. The world outside can move on, but inside, every second stretches, and every moment becomes a question: who is out there? What are they waiting for? And will you ever be free of the eyes that follow you? Tonight, you will hear 3 stories. Each begins quietly, each escalates steadily, and each will leave you with questions you may not have answers for. The first story begins in a home that was supposed to be a place of peace. A couple moved in, expecting comfort, but what they encountered changed everything. This is their story, the first of 3 true accounts of events that will make you reconsider the meaning of safety. They had finally found it, the house they had been dreaming of. The one that seemed to fit their lives perfectly. A quiet street, a garden for their rescued cat, Bella, and a sense of beginning. Life, for the first time in a long while, felt simple and complete. But the house next door was different. It had been abandoned for months, the fence between the backyards removed for renovations that were never finished. What should have been a neighborly site became an opening, a space that offered unguarded access to their home. At first, it was just a detail in the background. Occasionally, they saw young men cutting through the empty yard, moving from one property to the next. Perhaps they knew the owner. Perhaps it was nothing. Yet that first night, when the couple sat quietly in their garden, the ordinary blurred. And then, something happened that they could not ignore. They noticed him immediately, a figure standing at the upstairs window, staring. No expression, no movement beyond the gaze. Just eyes fixed on them through the darkness. Half an hour passed. The quiet garden, their safe place, had become an arena of observation. At first, they tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a neighbor curious about newcomers. Perhaps someone bored, watching out of habit. But the stare remained. And with each passing minute, their comfort waned. When they finally retreated inside, locking the back door, they expected relief. They hoped it had been a one-off, an anomaly in the quiet of a new home. But the anomaly was only beginning. Within days, the situation escalated. The men from the neighboring property began entering the yard freely, carrying objects they refused to identify. They offered strange gifts, washing tablets, small items, but their gestures were more about control than generosity. It was the ease with which they crossed boundaries that unsettled the couple. The broken fence, once just an inconvenience, became a gateway for intrusion. Every casual glance outside now carried tension. Every sound, the scrape of boards, the rustle of leaves, felt amplified. The young couple, barely out of their teens, understood instinctively the threat: intimidation. It wasn't physical yet. It wasn't violent. But the message was clear: they were being watched, evaluated, and encroached upon. Police visits followed. Officers stepped into the abandoned yard, lifted the fence, inspected briefly, and left. No confrontation. No arrests. No resolution. The law could only do so much. And in the meantime, the intrusions continued. Night by night, the presence across the yard became routine. The ordinary became dangerous, and every shadow outside held possibility. One night, while one of them bathed, a loud crash erupted outside. The sound of a fence board breaking, then the rush of footsteps, then silence. Heart racing, they ran to see a man sprinting toward the house, trying the door handle on the way. And then he disappeared as quickly as he arrived, leaving a broken barrier in his wake. The police were called. Statements taken. Nothing more could be done. But that was just the beginning. Soon, the whistling began. Soft, deliberate, meant to attract attention. Taps on windows in the early hours. At first brief, then longer. Whoever it was seemed to know the exact moments when the couple was most vulnerable. Even surveillance failed them. Cameras recorded little, showing only fragments. Someone had been here, someone was testing limits, someone was shaping fear itself into a tangible, inescapable force. The ordinary garden became an arena of suspense, and the home that once promised safety now carried an oppressive weight. 3 weeks passed. And then, the masked figure appeared. Hood drawn, black mask obscuring his features, arms spread wide in the night. A display, deliberate and unnerving, that left them frozen in place. Even after he left, standing silently across the street for half an hour, the fear lingered. Calls to authorities brought little comfort. Laws did not yet recognize the horror of being watched without contact, the terror of presence itself. The couple was left with cameras, locks, and a sense of helpless observation. Every glance outside, every shadow, every sound carried meaning. Every ordinary evening held the potential for intrusion. And the knowledge that the threat could return at any moment became part of their daily life. Fear seeped into their routines. Meals were eaten with one eye on the window. Sleep was measured in short, interrupted stretches. Even the sound of laughter from passing neighbors was filtered through caution. The home, once a place of comfort, had become a constant reminder that observation could happen at any moment. Attempts to leave were cautious. Returning home became a test of nerves. And with each failed recording, each unanswered call to authorities, the message became clear: someone, or some people, were shaping their reality, one act at a time. The subtle gestures, the silent presence, the calculated movements, these were not random. They were designed to unsettle, to force the occupants to see the world as precarious. And it worked. Every ordinary sound, every unremarkable shadow, became part of a narrative written entirely by another. A simple glance out a window at night became a measure of bravery, a test of courage. And yet, even bravery brought little relief. Because the presence was persistent, patient, and entirely deliberate. Fear had become woven into the fabric of their home, inescapable, pervasive, and unrelenting. The first night alone, without witnesses, brought a realization they could no longer ignore. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of floorboards, the whistle of wind against the window frame, even the subtle hum of a neighbor's distant car engine. It began softly, almost imperceptibly. A shuffle in the garden. A faint tapping at the window. They froze, hearts racing, listening. There was no breaking in yet. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just presence. The kind of presence that makes your own home feel alien, the familiar suddenly foreign. Every glance toward the broken fence reminded them of vulnerability. The men had exploited the gap before, there was no telling if they, or someone else, would return tonight. Sleep became impossible, and the couple spent hours silently watching a garden that had once been their sanctuary. They tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a neighbor. Perhaps it was a prank. But every rational thought collided with instinct. Something here was deliberate, patient, and entirely unreadable. Then, weeks later, the masked figure returned. Hood drawn, face obscured, arms spread wide like a silent declaration. He stood in the garden, staring at the bedroom window for what felt like hours. The couple called the police immediately, only to hear that there was little to do. Legally, standing on private property and staring was permitted. But the law could not measure the fear, the erosion of comfort, the slow, deliberate invasion of a mind and home. Each visit brought subtle changes. Broken fence boards, missing items, objects shifted ever so slightly. Cameras failed at the crucial moments. Doors that had been locked were discovered slightly ajar. They could feel it, someone had been inside while they were away. Yet when the authorities arrived, there was no evidence, no forced entry, no one to hold accountable. The boundaries between safety and threat blurred. Each creak, each shadow, each distant silhouette became suspect. Even familiar sounds, a car driving by, a cat in the garden, were measured against the possibility of intrusion. And every day, the garden, the yard, the windows, became stages for uncertainty and fear. The psychological strain became unbearable. Ordinary routines fractured under the weight of constant vigilance. Meals were eaten with one eye on the window. Conversations were measured, quiet, punctuated by sudden alerts at the smallest sound. Sleep was fractured. Rest became impossible. Nightmares intertwined with reality, and even the briefest moments of calm were haunted by anticipation. Every approach to the window carried dread. Every glance outside became an examination of movement, posture, and intent. Visitors, even friendly neighbors, were viewed with suspicion. Every human face, every shadow, became a potential observer. The intrusion had reshaped the couple's world, creating a constant, low-level panic that never fully dissipated. The intrusions escalated. One night, two masked figures approached the house, flashlights cutting across the windows. One held what appeared to be a crowbar, casually tapping against the garden gate, then leaning to peer into the bedroom window. No contact. No words. Just observation. A silent challenge: we are here, we are watching, and you are powerless. Days later, the couple discovered that their security cameras had been tampered with. SD cards removed, devices repositioned. Whoever had entered the property had studied the surveillance. They knew exactly how to remain unseen while projecting fear. The garden, once a place of peace, became a theater for intimidation. Shadows moved where there should have been none. Sounds echoed without origin. The couple began leaving lights on, leaving doors locked in ways that no one visitor could have undone, yet the feeling persisted. Someone was inside the world they had thought safe. And every night, the world of safety slipped further away. As the days passed, their mental state frayed. Hours of observation became days. Sleep was reduced to fragments. Meals were skipped, errands shortened. Fear became the background of life. Even brief absences felt dangerous. Running to the mailbox, checking the garden, retrieving a package, each became a test of courage. Every unexplained noise, every shifted object, every movement outside the window became a symptom of the same terrifying presence. Attempts to rationalize the situation were met with internal contradiction. The police could do little. Neighbors could offer no insight. The couple was left with cameras, locks, and the oppressive certainty that someone, somewhere, was orchestrating this psychological siege. They began noticing patterns, subtle, deliberate. Visits coincided with predictable routines, meal preparation, bedtime, moments when they were most isolated. Objects were shifted, cameras tampered, fences broken in the same places over and over. Sometimes, it felt as if the intruder had knowledge of thoughts, moving silently while they were lost in anxiety, anticipating reaction, observing with an almost clinical patience. And always, there was the stare. The figure at the window, hood drawn, mask obscuring features, arms spread like a silent statement. Always observing. Always present. Never leaving, never spoken to, never understood. To this day, the intrusions have not ceased. The couple remains vigilant. They have cameras, locks, and alarms. Yet the fear persists. Ordinary moments, cooking, reading, even petting their cat, are shadowed by the thought, is someone outside? Watching? Waiting? There is no closure, no explanation, no confrontation. Just the weight of observation, the knowledge that someone or something has chosen to invade the sanctity of home, and the certainty that control has shifted, invisibly, to an unseen presence. And the broken fence, the silent garden, the empty windows, each tells the same story, that the ordinary world is fragile, and safety is never guaranteed. The house next door remains abandoned. The intrusions continue, or perhaps they will return. The couple moves through their home cautiously, every glance measured, every sound questioned. This is the reality of fear without explanation. The terror that comes not from what is seen, but from what is possible. And the truth remains, in the world outside, sometimes the people we cannot see are the ones who have the greatest power over us. Some stories of fear don't involve breaking in, don't involve shouting or visible threat. Sometimes, the terror comes in small, deliberate moments, a phrase spoken by a stranger, a glance that lingers too long, a memory twisted into the real world. This is the story of one woman's attempt to leave a life behind, only to discover that certain presences follow, quietly, methodically, until the ordinary becomes a battlefield of observation. She ended a 2-year relationship with Caleb, a man whose affection had always been measured and controlled. Not violent, but meticulous in observation, in quiet insistence. After leaving him, she changed her number, disabled social media, and moved apartments. Every precaution seemed enough, until it wasn't. The first sign came in a small, ordinary setting. A barista greeted her with a nickname only Caleb had used. It was casual, almost cheerful, but there was weight to it, a familiarity that should not have existed outside his voice. Days later, a rideshare driver, an unfamiliar man in his 50s, spoke words she had only heard from Caleb. "Ever figure out what you're running from?" he asked casually, and then returned to silence. A chilling confirmation that the ordinary could suddenly carry the extraordinary, that the past could reach into every corner of her present life. The incidents multiplied. A woman brushed past her in the grocery store, whispering a sentence only Caleb would know, "You don't get to just disappear." Another man in a nearby building muttered, "Still wearing your hair like that." Each encounter alone might have seemed random, but together they formed a pattern, someone, or something, orchestrating familiarity, weaving private details into public spaces. It was not the faces themselves that alarmed her. Every person she saw was different. It was the repetition of thought, phrasing, and intent. The world had become a theater in which the audience was watching, rehearsed, and knowing too much. Anxiety became constant. She could not step out without anticipating a phrase, a gesture, a silent recognition. She stopped listening to music while walking, afraid someone might recognize her footsteps, her rhythm. The city, once a place of anonymity, had become intimate in a way she could not escape. She questioned her own perception. Had she imagined it? Was it a form of paranoia? Yet each incident was distinct, each phrase perfectly matched to memories only Caleb could have known. Even when informed that Caleb was in rehab for 6 weeks, completely unreachable, the certainty did not fade. If it was not him, then who? She began avoiding her apartment. Workdays stretched longer so she could leave later, return when the streets were busier. Even then, she noticed figures in the shadows, a man on a stoop, a woman passing slowly, glancing without stopping. One night, returning from work at 10 o'clock, a man in a hoodie sat across from her building. "Cold out tonight, huh, sunshine," he said without looking up. Her chest tightened. He did not move, did not acknowledge her presence beyond the words, and yet it was unmistakably directed. Inside, she checked every lock, every bolt, every chain. Sleep became a foreign concept. Each noise in the apartment, pipes, floorboards, air conditioning, triggered a surge of fear. She was safe physically, yet constantly threatened psychologically. She fled to a hotel for the weekend. Crowded, impersonal, yet it offered a fragile sense of safety. But even there, normalcy proved fleeting. At 2 a.m., 3 slow knocks came at her door. Through the peephole, a woman in her 40s, expressionless, stared back. Nothing was said. No interaction. The door remained locked. When the knock stopped, she breathed, shaken, but the thought persisted, she was still being observed, even here. The hotel staff confirmed no one should have been on that floor. She was alone. And yet the phrase that haunted her, sunshine, continued to echo in her mind, a quiet tether to a presence she could neither escape nor confront. Then came the realization, it was orchestrated. Caleb, in rehab, could not be the one directly. But his words, his phrases, his patterns were being delivered by others. Hired hands. Underground networks. Or perhaps strangers recruited to enact a living echo of his control. Every encounter, every phrase, every gaze, became part of an intricate, invisible mechanism, an ongoing reminder of observation, of influence, of psychological tethering. Her world had been infiltrated not by brute force, but by deliberate, patient manipulation. And there was no way to tell who had been hired, how many were involved, or where the next encounter would come from. Every person could be a messenger, every stranger a participant. The city had transformed into a labyrinth, and she had become both prey and witness. To this day, she moves carefully through her life. Social media is minimal, location is concealed, even hair color and appearance are altered to avoid recognition. And yet, the phrases continue, the familiarity persists. She has learned to trust no one's face entirely. A stranger on the street, a coworker, a passerby, all carry potential messages, subtle reminders of an unseen observer. And the terror remains, it is not the visible, the tangible, or the violent that shapes her fear, but the invisible, the whispered, the orchestrated. No confrontation. No resolution. Only the sense of presence, following, and the slow, steady erosion of certainty in what should have been ordinary life. Some fear comes from what we see. Other fear comes from what we cannot control, cannot predict, and cannot remove from our daily existence. For her, the threat is constant yet ungraspable. It exists in phrases, in recognition, in the certainty that someone, somewhere, watches, waits, and reminds her that she cannot disappear. And the question remains, if the past can reach into the present in this way, who else could be observing, and when will the next encounter occur? Even in places meant for rest and escape, fear can find a way to reach inside. A family set out for a simple trip to the Michigan Great Lakes, a chance to gather, to laugh, and to create memories. But sometimes, even the most ordinary settings hold secrets. Even the calmest waters can hide eyes watching from the shadows. And what they discovered would turn a peaceful retreat into a test of perception, trust, and survival. The family of 18, mostly homebodies, were surprised when an aunt suggested the trip. The house was a spacious Airbnb perched on the lake's edge, with wide windows reflecting the water and sky. Its charm was undeniable, promising comfort and the rare luxury of space for a large group. Most stayed in the main house, while some, including 3 cousins, were assigned a secondary building behind the main home, a 2-story garage converted into bedrooms. At first, it seemed trivial. The garage was older, the carpet worn, and the smell of damp lingered faintly. A weak latch barely secured the door, but the family dismissed it as part of the charm of staying somewhere with history. By nightfall, the initial excitement began to fade. The cousins assigned to the garage noticed small details: the carpet musty, the beds poorly made, the latch fragile. They hesitated, uneasy. As they began sorting laundry, the first moments of unease arrived. Around midnight, the quiet was broken by a loud bang against the garage door. It rattled the thin frame, as though someone had thrown their weight into it. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the sound was heavy, deliberate, and repeated. 20 minutes later, a third impact struck. Now, alertness replaced curiosity. No gust of wind or animal could make the noise. It was a presence. And it was watching. The family quickly convened. The aunt called the uncle to investigate. Outside, in the dim lamplight, a man stood behind the garage. He did not hide. He did not move quickly. He simply stood and stared. When the uncle called to him, the man walked away calmly, vanishing as though he had never been there. There were no footprints. The leaves were undisturbed. The ground offered no clue to where he had gone. Yet his presence was undeniable. 2 jester cards were later discovered, one in the garage, one in the main house, twisted, grotesque, as if mocking the family. The timing of the crashes and the cards suggested intent, an awareness that was impossible to ignore. The following night offered no reprieve. The family slept uneasily in the main house, but footsteps echoed on the porch. Doors rattled from attempts at entry, despite being locked and secured. Windows shook as if someone pressed against them from outside. The garage, previously considered a minor inconvenience, became a focal point of dread. One cousin theorized that someone had been watching them move about, noting who was alone, when they went upstairs or down. Every creak in the floor, every gust of wind against the siding became a potential threat. By this point, laughter and casual chatter had faded. The trip, meant to create joyful memories, was overshadowed by the presence of an unseen observer who had manipulated time, noise, and attention to instill unease. Despite their fear, the family could find no one. No evidence. The intruder was never caught, never confronted. They considered neighbors or locals, yet the property's isolation limited interaction. Even as they slept in groups, someone, somewhere, had observed their routines, waiting, testing. The aunt later recalled walking near the main house during daylight, seeing a woman on the neighboring beach staring without greeting, simply observing. Moments like these became frequent, minor, and chilling reminders that the family's presence was being monitored. It was a surveillance without capture, a quiet infiltration that left psychological traces more lasting than any physical break-in could. The family began losing the sense of security. Each night, the quiet was no longer peaceful but tense. The mind began to question ordinary sounds: the whir of the dryer, the creak of stairs, the slam of a door, each became a potential threat. Sleep deprivation and anxiety intertwined. The garage became a symbol of vulnerability. Anyone inside could be seen, heard, and potentially approached. The uncertainty of what was real and what was orchestrated wore on them. The incidents were not random, they were deliberate, timed, and calculated. Even during daylight, shadows cast by the house, the trees, and the beach became suspicious. Every visitor, every passerby, could have been involved, leaving the family in a state of constant vigilance. They attempted to reclaim the space. Lights were left on, doors secured, movements planned in groups. Still, the noises persisted. The banging on doors, the heavy impacts on the garage, the feeling of eyes observing from the shadows, they could not reclaim the ordinary. The family contacted the Airbnb host, seeking answers. She claimed she would review camera footage, yet no follow-up ever came. The lack of explanation compounded the fear. It suggested awareness, even collusion, or at least indifference. The boundaries between safety and exposure had been erased. On the last night, footsteps continued across the porch. The weak latch on the garage door rattled under invisible pressure. Attempts at entry seemed to align perfectly with moments when individuals were alone, awake, or moving between buildings. The family left earlier than planned, abandoning the garage entirely. On the drive home, they discussed every sound, every glance, every card, trying to reconstruct the presence that had shadowed them. The man behind the garage, the woman on the beach, the inexplicable cards, all remained unexplained. They returned home, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Ordinary houses, streets, and even familiar surroundings carried a residue of doubt. Some presences leave marks not on doors or windows, but on perception itself. And that is where the terror remained. Even vacations, even moments of escape, can be invaded, not through force, but through observation, through timing, through the quiet insistence of a presence that tests your nerves, your attention, and your very sense of security. Some questions remain unanswered. The identities of the observers. Their motives. And whether, if the family returned, they would find the same quiet, deliberate watchfulness waiting once again. 3 stories. 3 different places. 3 separate lives. A house that should have been a sanctuary. A city that should have offered anonymity. A vacation home that promised escape. And yet, in each case, something shifted. In the quiet of a backyard, observation replaced comfort. A broken fence became an open boundary. A masked figure stood just far enough away to remain untouchable. The law required evidence. Fear required none. In a crowded city filled with strangers, words became weapons. Familiar phrases traveled through unfamiliar mouths. Faces changed. Voices changed. But the message remained the same: you are seen. You are known. You are within reach. On the edge of a peaceful lake, beneath wide skies and open water, a family learned how fragile relaxation can be. A weak latch. A heavy impact against a door. A man standing just beyond the light. And 2 jester cards placed with intention, as if to say the performance had already begun. None of these stories end with certainty. No arrests. No confessions. No clear answers. Only patterns. Observation without confrontation. Presence without identity. Threat without resolution. And that is where the true weight lies. Because the most unsettling fear is not the kind that explodes into chaos. It is the kind that lingers quietly. The kind that settles into routine. The kind that forces you to question every ordinary sound, every passing stranger, every shadow just outside the reach of light. Safety is often defined by locks, alarms, distance. But these stories remind us that fear does not always require entry. Sometimes, it stands just outside. Sometimes, it walks among strangers. Sometimes, it waits patiently for you to notice it. And when you do, it does not leave. It becomes part of the air. Part of the silence. Part of the space between what you know and what you cannot explain. The couple still checks their garden at night. The woman still listens carefully to passing voices. The family still remembers the sound of that door shaking in the dark. Life continues. But something has changed. Because once you understand that observation can be deliberate. Once you realize that presence can exist without exposure. You begin to see the world differently. You begin to wonder who might be watching now. Perhaps the most chilling detail is this: in each story, the threat never needed to act fully. It only needed to remind its target that it could. And that possibility is enough. So tonight, as you turn off your lights, as you check your doors, as you glance toward the window before sleep, Ask yourself one question. If someone were watching, would you know?